Hello everybody, my name is Elliot Newton and I'm the Biodiversity Officer for Kingston Council. And welcome to the next episode of Reading Nature. And these are sessions that we're running with the library service to encourage you to get outside and explore our greener and wilder spaces across the borough and become more familiar with some of the amazing wildlife that also calls Kingston home. And today I'm standing in FISHPOND Park, which is a fantastic park between sort of Surbiton and Tolworth. And one thing I want to say just quickly before I get on to the rest of this episode is to say here we have a fantastic friends group like we have many of our parks. So one thing I would implore you to do when you go explore your local parks, check to see if it's got a friends group, and you might see, especially if you start to emerge from lockdown, there might be some really good opportunities to get involved and volunteer and help with your local park. But today what I want to tell you about are invertebrates and the creepy crawlies that a lot of people might be a bit worried and scared of. I want to try and show how amazing they are and how they really are important parts of the fabric of the ecosystems that live around us. And so invertebrates form a massive part of the animal kingdom. So they actually form 97%. So which is an incredible amount of diversity. Within that we have things like jellyfish and spiders and even things like crustaceans. Anything without the sort of skeletal system that we associate with mammals and vertebrates, really. But they really are really important parts of our sort of animal kingdom, as I say. And one thing that people sometimes confuse invertebrates with are insects. And obviously, all insects are invertebrates, but all invertebrates aren't insects. So how we define insects is typically is arthropods, so they are animals which have sort of an exoskeleton, but also insects will have typically 6 legs and maybe 1 or 2 pairs of wings. But insects are really, really important. So they're not just pollinators, but they also help to break down materials, which is part of the nutrient cycle, and they also are really important parts of the prey base, so providing food for things like small mammals and birds, stuff like that. So they really are an integral part of the food web and the web of life, making life possible on this planet. But unfortunately, our invertebrates and the insects are currently in a state of collapse. So we think maybe since 1970, we've lost maybe up to half of all our insects, which is obviously really, really damaging to our wider ecosystem function and poses really problems for ecosystem health. However, there are some really important and positive things we can do to try and make the world a better place for insects. One easy thing we can do is how we address pesticides and making sure we're planting for pollinators. But what we can also do in our gardens and in our parks, we can create these amazing structures, which are bug hotels. And bug hotels provide fantastic habitat for a whole array of different species. And I thought I might just tell you some of the species that we might likely call an amazing structure like this home. So you can see here we have these sort of mini indentations, and that might be a really good habitat for a species such as a mason bee. And bees are fantastic. Across the UK we've got about 270 different species of bee. 24 of those are bumblebees, but the majority of the bees across the UK are actually what we call solitary bees, and a mason bee is an example of one of those solitary bees, or a group of bees called mason bees at least. And what they do, they can go here, they land on here, and they create these sort of long chambers, these long sort of tunnels in which they lay their eggs, and then they sort of seal each section off, so each can compartmentalise that sort of chamber into different compartments, and that is where they lay their eggs. And interestingly, when they've made their tunnel to lay their eggs in, they'll always lay the females at the end of the tunnel and the males at the front. And we think there's sort of 2 main reasons for this. One is because when a bird, maybe like a great tit or a blue tit or something, wants to come and eat one of the eggs, they'll come down and they'll peck at the chamber, and typically they'll only eat the males. So the females, which are obviously vitally important for reproduction, will be safe. And then also when they emerge, the males will emerge first, and then the females emerge, and that also gives the males a better opportunity to mate with them and encourage that there will be more populations of mason bee in the future. So it provides fantastic habitat for solitary bees. And also if you go down to the lower parts, the more damper parts of the bug hotel, we'll get species like woodlouse. And woodlouse actually aren't insects at all because they've got more than 6 legs, but interestingly they're what we call crustaceans. So they need moist environments, because they need that moist environment, so that's where they breathe through their gills, and they need that moisture to enable them to breathe. The things that we associate with our woodlouse, we've got about 30 species-ish of woodlouse across the UK, but the common woodlouse is the one you're most likely going to see. But the things that are really important with woodlouse, they have that sort of armoured body which they can roll up into a ball, which protects them from predators. But they're really important detritivores. So what they're doing, they're eating things like leaf litter and leaf mould and recycling those nutrients. So really important part of that sort of food web that I'm talking about. But quite a funny fact that I like to tell people about woodlouse is that they can't actually, weed like we can. So what they do, they actually have to release that sort of ammonia through their sort of skin, through their sort of shells. So they actually release their that sort of chemical substances through their shells, which I always think is quite an interesting thing. And then their gills are actually based in their back legs, so that's where they breathe. But they're really important, as I said, not just for detritivores, but also things like centipedes and small mammals, and even some spiders will predate on them. Okay. So we've just taken a stroll across from the Bog Hotel over to this here, which is our loggery, which the Friends group have made here in the park. And we were just talking about woodlouse. And woodlouse are a really important prey species for a whole range of predators. And one of those predators is one of the most scary predators that I think we actually have in any of our gardens or any of our parks across the UK. And they are our centipedes. And these will be crawling around the leaf litter. They have quite poor eyesight, so they use their antennae to try and detect where their prey are. But what they do, they walk around, and once they find a prey species such as a woodlouse, they'll use their front legs, and their front legs again have been adapted into sort of these amazing sort of pincers which they use to inject venom into these woodlouse and other sort of various prey species that they'll eat. And while that venom is working to make its way and sort of immobilise the woodlouse, in this instance, they use their long bodies to wrap around the food that they're eating to make sure it doesn't escape. So they really are quite scary. But one thing to mention is they're not at all dangerous to us. They're only dangerous if you're about that big. So we haven't got to worry about them. But they do make up part of the amazing, incredible ecosystems and predator-prey balances that we have, the sort of battles that fight out in our sort of parks and gardens. And one quick thing that I like to say about centipedes is that of all the 50 species that we have in the UK, not any of them will have 100 legs. Because actually, centipedes actually have pairs of legs. They always are in line with the sort of compartment of their body, and they're always in odd numbers. For example, the common centipede has about 15 pairs of legs. And as we're standing here, I'm going to move on to a slightly different species, which is our stag beetles. So as well as centipedes, there is a whole range of insects that will be living in this park, and we've created some really good habitat for them to live in. And this is a really good example of habitat that we've made purely for the invertebrate community that live here. And this is what we call a stag beetle loggery, or a loggery that the Friends group here have made, and really is good habitat for the stag beetle, which I just mentioned. So stag beetles are one of the largest beetles that we have in the UK, but they have a fascinating life cycle. And they spend they're what we call a saprophilic community, or saprophilic species, and that means they spend most of their life munching on dead wood in this case. So what they'll do, the female stag beetle will land here in the summertime, she'll plant her egg, and then the stag beetle grub or larvae will be underground munching on dead wood, and it'll be munching away, building up its fat stores, and the stag beetle can be living underground between 3 and 7 years, and then sort of in the summertime it will emerge as a fully grown adult. And unfortunately, it'll only be living as an adult for a matter of weeks, a very short amount of time. And during that time is when it is trying to mate with a female to try and keep stag beetles living in areas such as this. But a lot of people are scared of stag beetles, mainly because they have these fantastic sort of mandibles, antler structures that come out of their sort of heads. And a lot of people think, oh, that male stag beetle might bite me. Well, actually, the male stag beetle cannot bite us at all, because it's given up its ability to eat, because those big antler-like structures are actually its jaws that it would need to eat, but it sacrificed those. Then they use those mandibles to combat other males. So what you'll get maybe 2 stag beetles that might land on a log such as this, and they'll fight each other, and the one stag beetle to fall off will be the stag beetle that loses, and the one that stays on is the one where we get to go and mate with the female. So it's a demonstration of its strength. But that means because it's sacrificed its mouth parts, it actually can't bite us at all. So it poses us no threat. So when you see a stag beetle, be sure do not be afraid of it. Just think, oh my gosh, that was a creature that's potentially spent 7 years incarcerated in Deadwood and is only out for a couple of weeks just to try and continue the stag beetle becoming a part of our parks. So hopefully this session has been a really good introduction to some of the invertebrates that you can find in our parks and gardens, and giving you some examples of things that you can do even in your home, in your parks and your gardens to improve our landscape for our creepy crawlies.